For the DTV story of today, we are going to visit the Embassy of Ireland in The Hague. We are going to meet the Irish ambassador to the Netherlands. Ambassador Kelly will leave from his current post, and we are pleased that he was willing to make time for an interview with us. Ireland is located west of Great Britain. The country is about twice the size of the Netherlands, but it has a smaller population. It's well known for its impressive green hills, rugged cliffs, and stunning coastlines. Just like the Netherlands, Ireland strongly depends on exports.
Ambassador, thank you very much for taking time and seeing us here in The Hague. How long have you been here?
Well, you're very welcome, Nina. I've been here in almost 5 years now, so the normal posting of an ambassador is 4 years, but I think the COVID pandemic led to a slight extension, so lucky me, I get to just stay for 5 years, but I will be leaving this summer.
So when you arrived on your post here in the Netherlands, what were some of the challenges you faced and some of the goals you perhaps had?
Well, in terms of personal challenges, it was my first European posting because in fact my whole diplomatic career has been in Africa. I've served in 5 different African countries, so it was quite a transition to come to The Hague, but it has been a really enjoyable experience. In terms of the challenges, I think I'd have to say Brexit was the big one, because when I was appointed as ambassador to the Netherlands, it was before the referendum where the UK voted to leave the European Union. And so Brexit wasn't really on the horizon, but I think it has greatly dominated my time here over the last 4 years. And that has been a very important part of my work in terms of ensuring that the Dutch government have a very clear sense on Ireland's positions on Brexit, but also that back home in Dublin, they know how the Dutch are thinking. And so that has very much, I suppose, dominated a lot of the day-to-day work. But it's been much bigger than that.
The Netherlands and Ireland have quite a strong and positive relationship. How do you feel that will be impacted by Brexit in terms of trade? Is there anything specific that might change in the future?
Well, Ireland and the Netherlands have always been close. We're always very like-minded, both within the European Union and also in the United Nations. And broadly speaking, we have a very good bilateral relationship. If anything, I'd say Brexit has brought us closer. We talk sometimes of a silver cloud. Neither Ireland or the Netherlands wanted the UK to leave the European Union. We very much regret that. We wish it didn't happen. But we are both countries on either sides of the UK, and so we stand to be greatly affected by their departure. And as a result, I think it brought us closer together. So during my time as ambassador, it's been a huge amount of activity and engagement, both at official level, politician level, ministers travelling to Dublin, Irish ministers coming here to The Hague. Our prime ministers have met. I think I've had 3 prime minister visits in my time. And of course, the icing on the cake was the royal visit 2 years ago, exactly this week, where His Majesty King Willem-Alexander and Her Majesty Queen Maxima came to Ireland. That was hugely symbolic. So if anything, it's been one of the positives in an otherwise sad story has been the deepening of our bilateral relationship with the Netherlands.
How do you view the Brexit and Northern Ireland agreement and the developments that are currently happening? What can be done to support the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland to keep a bit of faith and the calm during this time of transition?
As I said, Brexit wasn't good news for us from our perspective. We didn't want to see the UK as our closest neighbour, and so we were worked very well together within the European Union. But also, the UK's membership of the European Union also greatly helped our peace process in Northern Ireland, because both countries were part of the European Union, and once they left, that changed things. It changed a lot of realities for people in Northern Ireland. And so that's why there was such tough negotiations over a 4-year period to try to agree a protocol on Northern Ireland. Because for us, the challenge wasn't just about trade and economics, although the implications of that are significant for the Netherlands and for Ireland. But for us, it was about protecting our peace process. We have a peace agreement called the Good Friday Agreement that was agreed in 1998. And that's an agreement between Ireland and the United Kingdom, but also involving the parties and the partners in Northern Ireland. And it was very much done under the support of the European Union and the United States of America. So it was an international agreement. And so our objective throughout the Brexit negotiations were to protect that agreement and make sure. Our biggest fear was that there would be a border, the erection of any kind of border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. We felt that it could pose a lot of destabilisation.
So being an ambassador in The Hague in particular is quite different than your previous experience in Africa, I assume. So here you are exposed to international organization, the Criminal Court of Justice, all these types of really admirable organizations, international organizations. Which ones do you work with closely and which ones are really close to your heart?
Well, in fact, that's one of the nicest part about being an ambassador in The Hague, in that we don't just I'm not just responsible for the bilateral relationship with the Netherlands, which is already very busy in terms of political engagement, economic, trade, and there's been a lot of activity in all of that. But the fact that this is also, The Hague is the city of peace and justice. And as you mentioned, a lot of international organisations, very important ones for international peace and security, are actually based here. So as Ireland's ambassador to the Netherlands, I'm also Ireland's permanent representative to many of these organisations. You mentioned chemical weapons. In the past, the OPCW, the Chemical Weapons Organisation, was a relatively quiet organisation, but unfortunately in recent years we've seen the dreadful use of chemical weapons in Syria, we've seen them used in the United Kingdom, and so a lot of activity has moved to The Hague in terms of negotiations in order to create a world free of chemical weapons. And as Ireland's representative, I attend those meetings, I represent our national position at those meetings. Likewise, the International Criminal Court, a hugely important institution, because it is about, you know, the worst crimes against humanity, and it's about accountability. So actually what's very interesting at the moment, in 2021, Ireland has just joined the UN Security Council. So we are playing a very important role as part of the 15 members of the Security Council in New York. But the work that we do in The Hague feeds directly into that work. So we're very much in tune with our people in Dublin and New York to make sure that we are able to present a very holistic view of Irish foreign policy. And so The Hague is perhaps even a more important role than it was before we were on that Security Council.
So what is the most profound thing for you that you've learned by being exposed to this type of environment where these organizations exist that are so active?
I suppose one thing I've learned is that, you know, the work of multilateralism and, you know, the negotiations involved can sometimes appear very distant to the reality. So when you're sitting in a conference room in The Hague and you're debating, you're in very tough negotiations with other countries around treaty obligations, it can seem very far removed. One thing that I think brought with me from my experience in Africa, having lived for over 16 years in Africa and lived in some of the countries that, you know, quite challenging in terms of problems of peace and security, was to try to bring some of this perspective about the real life implications of some of this work. So for example, I actually was pushing to bring a group of ambassadors from The Hague to northern Uganda, so that they could see for themselves the work of the International Criminal Court, and in particular the work of the Trust Fund for Victims. And so that when we're sitting in The Hague and when we're negotiating between us as countries and we're looking just as texts and arguing about paragraphs, and that actually people realise that the importance of this work for real people's lives in many of countries throughout the world. And I think that that is an important lesson that I've learned that I could bring and that Ireland can perhaps bring to the world of multilateralism.
In 1998, the United Kingdom and Ireland both agreed to the Good Friday Agreement. Thanks to this agreement, most of the violence in Northern Ireland ended. But recently, Irish Deputy Prime Minister Leo Varadkar made a statement that the reunification of Ireland and the Northern Ireland could happen in his lifetime. We asked Ambassador Kelly for a reaction.
Leo Varadkar is our former Taoiseach, our former Prime Minister, but he's currently our Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland. So he's a very important political figure in Ireland. And it's true, he made a statement yesterday, I think at a party congress, about a united Ireland. I suppose what I would say is that there's nothing particularly unusual about that. You know, many Irish people living in the Republic of Ireland would, of course, hope at some day to see a united Ireland. But what's very important is, beyond the headlines, because it looks very dramatic, is that Mr. Varadkar and the Irish government have always been very clear that a united Ireland can only come about through a peaceful process of negotiation and consent. I mentioned earlier in our discussion the Good Friday Agreement, which was this wonderful agreement that was struck back in 1998. But within that is a fundamental principle is one of consent. And it's about that the people of Northern Ireland will decide their future, whether they want to remain part of the United Kingdom as it currently is, or whether they decide to join a united Ireland. And that will only happen through a very clear process of negotiation and peaceful accommodation. And I think I read actually the comments of Mr. Varadkar, and he went on to say that if such a united Ireland were to happen, it'll be a very different Ireland. It has to be, it's not that we would take over Northern Ireland. It would be a new country where all identities are respected, and that the unionist identity, because there's a significant part of the population in Northern Ireland who feel themselves as being British, they believe in the union with the United Kingdom, and that tradition needs to be respected in any future accommodation.
So do you think Brexit is moving Ireland closer or further away from that possibility?
Yeah, I mean, there are those that say that Brexit has hastened voices, and I mean, I think it is true to say that shortly after the Brexit results came in, and there was a slight majority in Northern Ireland that voted to stay in the European Union, so it's very interesting if you look at the results of the Brexit referendum. I think the majority of people in Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union, but the majority of people in England voted to exit. But the overall referendum, the result we know. So, I mean, straight after that referendum result, we did hear increasing voices around a united Ireland. But I think the Irish government has always been very sensitive and careful about saying that what's most important is a peace, to maintain the peace in Northern Ireland, and to make sure that any changes to the constitutional settlement that we have are done with the full consent of the population in Northern Ireland. And I think that that's a position that won't change in terms of my government's view.
What is one piece of advice you would give your successor to the Netherlands?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned is that, again, quite different from my previous roles, when I was an ambassador in Uganda or I was in Ethiopia before that, you really are, you're the only face of the Irish government in those countries. There isn't a huge amount of political contact. Here in the Netherlands, what I learned very quickly is that our ministers have each other on WhatsApp, they're messaging each other, they're in regular contact. And so as an ambassador and as an embassy, you need to add value to that. And how do you do that? It's about building relationships, not just the political ones, which happen very often in Brussels and when our ministers meet at various meetings, but it's relationships between people. And it's about building up those people-to-people links in terms of culture, our lifestyle, our music, and also in terms of our values and our core principles. So for my successor, in terms of advice to my successor, it would be about trying to get outside The Hague, and not just confine yourself to meetings here, but try to get out and see this wonderful country. It's a small country. Not many people know it's actually smaller than Ireland in terms of geography, but of course the Netherlands is a much bigger country in terms of population. But you know, there's such diversity in this country, and to get out and meet people in Maastricht or Groningen, and I have tried to do that. I've tried to not just be in The Hague, but to build those links throughout the country. So that would be perhaps one piece of advice.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. It was very nice to come and hear your input on all these subjects we were curious about. We wish you all the best of luck and happy homecoming.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you.